Test. So yeah, looks like I'm good. Okay. I'm Phil Wyman, and this is the Wild Theology podcast, where the world, the humans in it, and God are all wilder than we've been told.
That's your intro.
So, you'll get philosophy and theology and crazy stories that come from 30 years of pastoring.
Boring.
20 years of festival work.
Whatever.
And the mud and blood of wrestling with the living in spaces angels fear to tread.
Ooh, trying to sound interesting, are we?
Oh.
Yeah, you think you got something to say?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the problem, dimwit.
Like I'm a lot smarter than you think.
Yeah, you tightened your shoes this morning.
Whatever. We're Phil Wyman, and this is Wild Theology, where you get to argue with your own ideas.
And lose.
That's the point. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Phil Wyman. So, this is Love Big or Go Home, episode 5. And today I'll be talking about going places that other people are not going as a fundamental element of the gospel. I personally jokingly will tell people that I get nervous when I drive through cities like Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Colorado Springs, Colorado. I'm actually only half joking. I really do get mildly nervous. These are cities with large megachurches and ministry headquarters for large Christian ministries. I typically go on to say that when I visit these places, that I'm in need of a few good pagans. Of course, since I pastored a church in Witch City, USA for almost 20 years, I suppose being comfortable with witches and pagans is no unique thing for me. Our little city has thousands of people who self-identify as witches or neo-pagans. Then again, I suppose it is unique, because saying that I would rather hang out with pagans than Christians is not something one might expect to hear from a Christian pastor. But that's unfortunate. And it's unfortunate because there are few people who carry the radical apostolic drive we discover in somebody like the Apostle Paul, who sought to go where the gospel of Christ was unknown. He wanted to lay a foundation of faith in Christ and leave behind a group of followers to move on in that newfound faith. You can imagine Paul looking at an ancient and seriously undependable map and saying to Silas or Timothy, "That's where we need to go next." And then he points words near the border that say, "Here be dragons." The apostolic drive sees the words, "Here be dragons," and gets excited. I am most comfortable in places that many Christians imagine dragons. Moving to Salem, Massachusetts, made Christian leaders I knew feel uncomfortable. They wondered why I would choose to move to such a place. I, on the other hand, wondered why on earth they were still on earth. If we're not here as witnesses to those who do not yet believe, why are we here at all? This temporary life is not just a party for the in crowd. We are not here to build fortresses against the onslaught of devils, or clubs for people who speak a strange form of religious language, complete with rising sing-song tones and a breathy expressed at the end of each phrase. We are here as witnesses, called to go to the uttermost part of the earth. It is a specific interest in the heart of God for places where the gospel is not well known. It may be hard to imagine that there are no such places that have been untouched by the gospel after all these centuries of Christianity being the largest religion on the planet. But it nonetheless remains true. The gospel has not reached every ethnic group. In the circles of people I know, there's been an increasing distaste for foreign missions. People are making promises to avoid air travel and thereby decrease their carbon footprint in order to help alleviate global climate change. Some have been using this opportunity to declare that staying home is the next great mission field. And though staying home should be the greatest mission field on earth, it is not the only mission field, and it cannot replace the apostolic movement of the gospel. We have been told that the entire framework of foreign missions is built on the destruction of other cultures. It is framed by the exportation of capitalism and the American way of life and seeks to exploit others. This is what Eliza Griswold, author of The 10th Parallel, recently dubbed as, quote, "the dubious enterprise of empire," unquote, in her article in The New Yorker on the death of missionary John Chow on North Sentinel Island. Now, John Chow's death is, I suppose, old news. This happened a few months back. But as is often the case, news is often fraught with all kinds of unfortunate information or a lack of information. So let's look back on this story. I think John Chow's death is an extreme example which highlights the tension over missionary activity. Many Christian missionaries work quietly and carefully in places that are considered dangerous. They move into Muslim nations and work as teachers, businessmen, businesswomen, doctors, organizers, and supporters of NGOs, and a variety of occupations that help bring benefit to the communities they serve. They quietly express their beliefs among new friends, or believe that their lifestyle is sufficient evidence of their faith in Christ. Many of them do not attempt to convert people, but believe that it is God who does the conversion, and that we are not required to present the gospel in a sales pitch with a requisite closing of the deal. The news went crazy with the details of John Chow's death. Discussions and debates, conjecture and critique flew like the arrows that killed him. We live in a season when everyone is an armchair judge, and the judgments flew quickly over the death of a man of whom we have only snapshot accounts. The 26-year-old was part of a group called All Nations, which focuses on taking the gospel into the remotest parts of the earth. John appeared to take many of the precautions one might expect from an anthropologist studying remote hunter-gatherer tribes, but did so with what appeared to be, at least to the world, a daredevil approach reminiscent of Indiana Jones. But John Chow prepared for almost 10 years. He studied sports medicine and exercise science. He trained as an emergency medical technician in hopes of providing help to the Sentinelese. He pursued linguistics, cross-cultural engagement, and wilderness training. Before he left for North Sentinel Island, he quarantined himself in a safe house to protect the Sentinelese from potential risk of disease. Though we may call his act foolhardy, he certainly was not ill-prepared. North Sentinel Island is a small remote island in the Bay of Bengal. The Sentinelese people have avoided contact with outsiders for centuries and remain one of the last tribal groups untouched by outside influence. Today, it is illegal to come within 3 nautical miles of the island because the Indian government has declared the island an excluded zone. By going to North Sentinel Island, John Chow was breaking the law, but he believed that the command of Jesus in the Great Commission to take the gospel to the uttermost part of the earth superseded the laws of India, according to the mission organization All Nations. His goal was not to convert the people, but simply to present the gospel to them so they could decide for themselves. Many missionaries appear to believe that John Chow was both wrong and reckless in attempting to reach the Sentinelese people with the gospel. But as missionaries, they remain resolute in believing that go is still a command of the Great Commission. Some have reserved judgment and not given an opinion. Others consider him a modern-day martyr. Whether you feel that John Chow suffered for the sake of the gospel or that he died as a foolish young man, the fact of the matter is this: there is a command to take the gospel into the whole earth. A number of years ago, while preparing to teach on the subject of the Great Commission, I scoured the texts, the scriptures that mention the scope of the Great Commission. I anticipated that we might find a repeating Greek word for world or earth that would give fuller meaning to the command. Instead, I found that the passages relating to the scope of the command to go and preach the gospel covered a range of different words to describe the location and direction of our going. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus utilizes the Greek word that is best translated as earth, in the same sense that we use the word earth in English. It can be the planet, or it can be the soil on the ground. In a sense, it's saying like the gospel should be taken to all places on the map, and it should go everywhere people live and plant or make their homes. In the 16th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, we find a word referring to all creation, or every creature. Everything God has made and every life God has breathed spirit into is included in the definition of this word. There is no place the gospel is not meant to be, no place it is not meant to influence, and no creature it is not meant to benefit. Though the gospel is directed to human beings, we are told that even the earth itself groans in travail, waiting for the final fulfillment of all that the gospel offers. In the Gospel of Luke, the word ethne describes the scope of the gospel in a third way. The good news from God is meant to go to every nation, or as the word ethne hints, to every ethnic group upon the planet. The gospel is colorblind and non-discriminatory. It has no preferences for race, sex, and gender, occupation, classes, or castes. It is not influenced by birthright or fame or money. Like equal opportunity housing, it seeks to be a shelter from the storm for everybody. The classic reference to the scope of the gospel is not found within the commands of the Great Commission, but perhaps in the most famous of all verses in Scriptures. John 3:16 shows us the range of God's love, and by association the scope of the Great Commission. It seems appropriate to revisit this passage in its most well-known form in the King's English. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Here, the word world is kosmon. From the same word we get our English word cosmos. Yes, it means the planet, sometimes the entire universe. Other times this word is used to describe the systems of power and the order of things in the world, though it is clear that cosmos is used in this passage to speak of all the people in the world. One cannot help but wonder if the same Jesus who saw people as sheep without a shepherd also saw humanity struggling under the burden of the corrupt systems of our world, and used this word to emphasize deliverance from the systemic corruption of the powers of the nations. In the 10th chapter of Romans, Paul speaks about faith in Christ that comes through hearing the word. He says that it has gone all across the earth, and he uses two different words to highlight this fact. Along with the word geis, which we saw in Matthew 28, Paul says that the word has gone out into every oikoumene. This cognate of oikos refers to dwelling places, and the family groups, and the circle of people who make up the place we call home. It carries a sense of family and the property and the home of the family unit. The word has become the root of our English words economics and ecology. The use of this word hints at the fact that gospel speaks so deeply into our lives that it affects everything we own, even as it touches our hearts. Perhaps the use of all of these words that frame the scope of the Great Commission hint at the incredible power and adaptability of the gospel. It speaks to every ethnic group and their unique struggles. It carries an impact that shakes the foundations of the earth itself and brings deliverance to a creation already quivering under the weight of evil. It speaks to the systems of power and the governmental structures by critiquing their abuses and empowering their compassion, and it is deliverance to those most abused. The unstoppable and universal power of the gospel is evidenced by the fact that it can benefit all creation, anywhere, anytime, doing anything God should will. But it is not God's untrammeled power to do great things that makes me meditate in wonder on the power of the gospel. It is the fact that the gospel touches the smallest individual and is concerned over the littlest details, even while juggling the planets and shedding tears over wars, diseases, and natural disasters. We joke about the fact that while people with first world problems are praying for a parking space, in the third world people are struggling not only to put food on the table, but they have no table to put that food upon. Could it be that the love of God is best evidenced by the fact that even while he is concerned about the deepest tragedies and the largest problems, that he can also listen to the smallest complaints and help with the littlest things? While our momentary comforts and our impatience and the mundane issues of life are not going to be pampered by God, he remains like a grandfather spirit, smiling upon us with loving understanding. He can do anything, and that means everything from the largest problem to the smallest detail. Creation was spoken into existence by God's power. I believe that he will wrap history together in a beautiful redemptive story that shows his awesome power and his perfect love, but I am most astonished when I consider that through it all, he whispers to us in our worried little lives. Perhaps sometimes God even finds parking spaces. and because God cares for all people and is concerned with the details of all our lives. He's working everywhere at all times. What this means for those who have chosen the radical mission life of following the Great Commission is that we must care for the places God cares for. We must go to the places God is concerned about. High on our list of concerns should be the places where the gospel is not at work, because it is our task to share its power and love with others. Because God and His gospel are accessed by faith, the declaration of that message is of the uttermost importance, and that is why we are called to the uttermost parts of the earth. The scope of the Great Commission is the uttermost part of the earth, but the most distant places are not always measured in miles. Many of the unreached places are internal. Dark and hopeless conditions are found in human hearts. Whether we stay at home or travel to remote destinations, the most distant locations are found inside each of us. The needy and the overlooked are all around us, and in fact are living in our neighborhoods. The single person living alone and drinking away their evenings with one more glass too much of wine. The woman trading pills with a network of so-called friends, sharing their unused prescription of pain-numbing medications. The young goth trolling the streets in his black robes and pasty white makeup. The small gatherings of dirty kids sitting on benches and walls on the edges of downtown. The frumpy character shouting at the air from the street corner, and the ethnic minority sitting alone in the fast food restaurant. These, and a billion others, are living in the uttermost part of the earth, because the uttermost part of the earth forms itself around human hearts every day. Those who would break the barriers of social convention and talk to the outcast portray the heart of God. It is these people who show their concern for the concerns of God, who model the Great Commission. We are going to the uttermost part of the earth when we spend our times with the homeless, the addicted, the strange-looking people on this planet. And these people are in our neighborhood. When others would say that this is a place I would never go, or a person I would never talk to, it just might be that this is exactly where we should be going. Though we cannot deny the fundamental truth that the gospel is inherently nomadic, the saying remains true that the biggest mission field is at home, because the uttermost part of the earth is just outside your door. You can go where others will not, without traveling to distant places. Many Christians wonder what on earth we are doing when we go to the craziest and most overlooked people, or travel to the craziest and perhaps most overlooked places. And when they wonder why, I will ask why on earth they are still on earth if they're not going to the uttermost part of the earth. Thank you to Dr. DK for the background music, which you heard today, which is Reflections. And if you want to find more of his music, you can find it at drdk.bandcamp.com. If you'd like to support this project, you can do so here on Patreon for as little as $1 a release, and at the most, that's $4 a month.
Why on earth would anybody want to support us?
Well, I think we're pretty cool, and maybe some people believe in what we're doing.
Oh, come on, you believe that?
Yeah.
Don't you ever think you're just a little too weird for the average person?
Yeah, sometimes.